Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's edition of Inside the Trojans Huddle with your usual WeAreSC crew. We're going to talk a lot of USC football today. That shouldn't surprise anybody. And we'll probably talk about some things that aren't USC football. That won't surprise anybody either. Usual crew this week: Eric McKinney, editor-in-chief of WeAreSC; Mark Hulkin, WeAreSC columnist, podcaster, and the guy on the scene to always tell us what's going on at practice, to the extent that they let us see practice. Okay, sort of an eventful week this week. Not necessarily just for USC football, but for college football and college sports overall. And so let's start there. As most of you may know, the NCAA cut a deal this week regarding these class action lawsuits that have been plaguing them, and all of the conferences signed off on it. Now, this has been a long time coming. The original case that did things like allow NIL and essentially end NCAA football on EA until this year. All this stuff happened when O'Bannon from UCLA sued many years ago. And to put that in perspective, O'Bannon was in college at the same time I was. So these things have been dragging on for decades. There's a lot we don't know about the deal. Here's what we do know about the deal. For the very first time, major college athletes will be given revenue sharing of up to $20 million. That's almost all we know. Now, we know a little bit about what the NCAA and the conferences are saying they're trying to achieve. We know they're trying to achieve, one, a gigantic judgment, because they've been making money off of the names, images, and likeness of players for many, many, many years. We know the NCAA is trying to hold on to its position where it can still regulate, and maybe the courts will uphold it. We'll see whether this settlement helps them with that. And everybody in college football is trying to avoid having players deemed employees, where they would have both the rights and obligations of employees, including the ability to unionize and collectively bargain. So there's a lot there to cover. It'll probably take us a little while to get through it, but let's just start with big picture. Eric, let's start with you. What do you think of this settlement? Good thing, bad thing? Do we know? And where do you think this is all leading?
We don't. Ultimately, we don't know because you just don't know where it's leading. That's your question, right? I mean, we could end up with a completely different look by the time I'm done saying the sentence. By the time we put the show, by the end of the week, by the end of the month, it just the nature of this is something where you almost don't want to land on these small individual battles until you get to the very end, and you want it to be all done in one shot, because it feels like you might be tying yourself to things where ultimately that's not the best way to go. It's this other way. I don't think there is a huge push. I mean, obviously from the schools, just talking in terms of employment, in terms of student athletes becoming employees, the schools do not want that. I don't really think the players want that either. I think there's a big push from sort of outside talking to the players, hey, you should do this, you should do this. I don't know if either of the groups intimately involved want that at the end. I think the players kind of like the way this is going between NIL. I think this revenue sharing at this sort of, I say small amount, 20 million is a big number, but in terms of the numbers we're talking about with TV revenue and all of that, 20 million is okay. Well, that's an ante in a poker game to stay in and keep playing, is what it feels like for these colleges that want to play this big time college football. I think that's a good start. I think it's one of those things where this is not going to get rid of collectives. This is not going to get rid of NIL. This is going to be something where everyone's got to figure out, how do you distribute this? Is this all football? Is this football and basketball and basketball? Is this football? Do you involve baseball in this? Do you eventually have to come up with basically like an NIL booster to float your tennis team or your golf team to bring money in? And now you're talking about like sort of how professional sports are. You have a brand, right? You make a a business agreement, and all of a sudden this company is sponsoring your golf team and you wear their brand on your uniforms. I mean, that's kind of the thing where you don't have a finish line. That's all kind of going to be talked about as we go forward. Where are all the answers coming? Again, this is a small piece. The idea that this is okay, we've hit the finish line. This is what this looks like. Let's move forward here. I think we could have a lot of different answers even before the football season starts. Saying all that, 20 million a year, if you opt in, you'd better do it if you're a school, right? Because some schools are absolutely going to and then look for more. That's again going to be, I think, I sort of likened it. I think that's the ante to keep playing college sports at a big time level. Still think the end result is the Big Ten and the SEC take control of this. There's an AFC, NFC sort of thing. You've got those two major divisions. Schools get split up however they're going to get split up. But this is the start to that revenue sharing. How far does it go? I don't know if anybody has that answer yet. I think it's going to be pushed more and more and more though by not necessarily the players. I don't know if they have enough time to get out in front of this and start to really say these are all the things we want, but by people sort of representing their interests, there's going to be a lot more conversation about, okay, 20 is a start. How far can we go now?
Yeah, yeah. A lot of good stuff there. Mark, what do you think?
Well, I think the day's arrived. Let's just assume that 20 million is for football right now, because I think that number is going to get bigger when we're talking about revenue sharing with, and the NCAA is pretty much, they're dead, they're gone, they're history now. Once they relinquish this, right, where they're saying you're no longer an amateur, man, we've taken a different turn at Pismo Beach at this point. You know, I did the math. Let's say $20 million is strictly set aside for football programs. You've got 85 scholarship players. You divide 20 million by 85, you're making a pretty good living going to college at 235,000 per year. So Eric is absolutely correct. This is just another version of the Billionaire Boys Club that's just now at the college level. The schools are going to make a load of money. You've got employees now, because that's what they're going to be. If the schools are going to directly pay students, you're going to have them sign a contract. You're going to hold them to certain, these are your hours. You have to be here for this. You have to be there for that. And then you got the taxes. So again, how does this affect USC compared to, say, a state like Florida, where you don't have state taxes? Where does the advantage kick in? This is so unique. What's going to be coming down the pipe with college football? We have reached the semi-pro level. You don't have to go to class anymore if you're a contracted employee. Are they going to make you pay for your own tuition now out of your salary? Again, so many unanswered questions. Is this the end of the walk-on? What happens going forward? This is crazy. But for the NCAA to say, yeah, players, you can share in the revenue. Who thought we would be here 5 years ago?
5 years ago? I think I might have thought it 5 years ago. I don't know that I would have before that. So let me talk about some things that I think are important to understand when we get this. Some of this is going to be boring lawyer talk. So if you want to fast forward, go ahead. So here's the problem. What the NCAA is trying to avoid, I'm not sure they can avoid through this settlement. In fact, I'm sure they can't. This settlement is only a first step to try to convince Congress to give them what they want. The NCAA wants Congress to step in. Why? Because if you have 50 different states all doing their own legislation, then you're going to have different rules all over the place. They don't want that. Second, the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board, is mucking around and in the early stages of declaring college athletes to be employees. The NCAA does not want that. The schools do not want that. As Eric pointed out, probably most of the players don't want that. Doesn't really matter what they want, though. All it takes is one player to make that claim to the NLRB to accept it. And once the NLRB accepts it, understand there's limit there. Other than Congress, there are very few people in the country who can do anything about it. Could the court step in? They could. They might not. There's something called Chevron deference. It comes from a Supreme Court case a long time ago, where what the Supreme Court said is that courts are supposed to give deference to federal agencies within the course and scope of what they're supposed to be overseeing. And that means if a federal agency makes a decision, unless the federal courts conclude that their decision is just bonkers, then they're going to accept their conclusion. Now, that would make it sound like the NLRB can do whatever they want and the courts will stay away. That might be true, but it just so happens that there are lawsuits before the Supreme Court right now that are questioning whether Chevron deference will continue. So we don't know. And understand the NLRB is not like most federal agencies where every time there's a change of administrations, the top people from the old administration can get kicked out, new people come in, and then they try to reset policy. The NLRB has a board of 5 that has set terms, so you don't necessarily get immediate changeover when you have a new president. And we don't know what Biden and Trump's positions are going to be on this anyway. Even after the election's decided, we don't know we don't know what the administration's position will be. We can make some guesses. So here's how I think it all shakes out. Right now, the NCAA is going to Congress. They're hoping that Congress will, one, save them by setting them up essentially as the governing body for college athletics. I'm skeptical that Congress is going to do that. Second, the NCAA wants, and the schools want, Congress to give an antitrust exemption to college football, the way Major League Baseball has one. That is not going to happen. Zero chance. They can ask all they want. It's not going to happen. The NBA doesn't have one. The NFL doesn't have one. Baseball has one because some historical anomaly that goes back to 1922. That will not happen. And by the way, the idea that Congress isn't going to want to meddle in college football or have federal agencies meddle in college football is kind of ridiculous when you consider just how much the federal government is involved in higher education anyway. Right? I mean, you've all heard of Title IX. There are federal grants, there are federal loan programs, there are all kinds of federal regulations that cover higher education. They're not going to step out of this. They're not going to. The NCAA wants Congress to say, you go do whatever you want. We're going to give you the right to do it, and you have an antitrust exemption. Zero chance. So what we know is that $20 million is going to be split up by all the major colleges. And by the way, if you, I think Mark made the statement earlier about this is the price of admission. Can you imagine if somebody, say UCLA, says we're not going to jump in and offer the $20 million? You say that, and your recruiting is dead, right? I mean, that all anybody's going to talk about is how they're not going to revenue share with you. We'll revenue share with you. I mean. They're not going to pay you. They're clearly not committed to college sports. So they're going to do that. How do you split it up? Well, if it's revenue sharing, you would say, well, we're going to give the money to the people who generate the revenue. But I don't know that that's what's going to happen. You don't have revenue sharing where there are sports that don't generate revenue. Most sports don't. But that doesn't mean those athletes aren't going to get a chunk of the $20 million. I think they will. There's going to be all kinds of political pressure. There are all kinds of philosophical reasons why people are going to want the Olympic sports, women's sports to share in this and maybe even share equally. Nobody's decided what's going to happen with that. Who's going to make the decision? Well, I suspect that the colleges would like it if there's some sort of uniform rule. Don't know if there's going to be. If there is a uniform rule, I'm not sure it will be enforceable. And even if the colleges all got together with the NCAA and they all voted unanimously as to what would be done with this money, what if the federal government decides that Title IX requires you to share equally between men's and women's sports? Could they do that? They can, because Title IX is written by, like so much federal legislation in recent years, which is to say it states a general principle and then it throws it to the regulators to do what they want with it, which is why Title IX interpretations change when administrations change. And it also means that you don't necessarily know who's going to be in charge or what they're going to say. So $20 million is going to be split up. Nobody knows how. The NCAA is not going to get from Congress what they want. The question is whether at some point some sort of grand compromise is possible. I think there is, and I think this is what it looks like. The Congress will decide that the NCAA that the athletes are not employees. There will be revenue sharing obligations that will be part of that legislation. Congress will probably install some rules that allow the universities to control things like transfer portal jumping back and forth, when it can be done, how often it can be done. But that's going to require some legislation because many states, including California, have prohibitions on restraints of trade, which is why you can go work for anybody you want to, and your employer really can't do anything about it. Even if you have a contract with your employer that says you can't, unless you are a rare type of employee that has special skills. It may be that if you're Robert De Niro and you signed a deal, you may not be able to walk. But if you're Chris Arledge, you can, because there's nothing special about me. So they're going to need Congress to step in and help with that. They want Congress to limit NIL. Congress is not going to limit NIL. They're not. Will they agree to certain rules regarding NIL to make it where it's actually legitimate endorsements rather than something else? Maybe. So a grand compromise is possible, but I don't know if you've noticed, Congress is kind of a mess these days. It's a disaster. And that's not just one party, it's both parties. It's not one individual, it's a whole collection of them. They seem interested mostly on getting on cable news rather than doing anything productive. And they fight all the time, and it's just a disaster. So if your only hope to bring an end to the chaos is congressional legislation, and I think it is, I think you're in trouble. So nobody knows what these rules are going to be. There's going to be lots of litigation, which I love myself. I think there's nothing better for America than lots of litigation. It's what keeps me employed. But and you have a lot of people that are going to be involved in this who don't care about college sports. The federal bureaucrats do not care about college sports. Some of them might. Most of them do not. Most people in Congress don't care about college sports, or to the extent they do, they care about other things more. For example, if you're asking Congress to pass a bill that limits that means that athletes can't be employees or that they can't collectively bargain, you can have a lot of people in Congress who are getting phone calls from unions that they care deeply about, that may contribute to their campaign, saying, "I don't want you to do that. I want collective bargaining in college sports." Right? It's just politics. So all of this is to say that what we know is very limited. What we don't know is gargantuan. Things will continue to change at a rapid pace. And even if the powers that be in college football come together and decide what they want, I don't know that federal regulators and federal courts aren't going to come in and mess that up. And I also don't know that state legislatures aren't going to do the same and set rules for their states that don't apply to other states and do what Texas did, which is say, here are the rules that govern NIL here, and there is no body who can change these rules in the state of Texas. So there are a lot of cooks in this kitchen, and with a lot of disparate interests. And right now, I don't know that there's any way to get Congress to take action. And without Congress taking action, we're not going to have a clear answer to any of this stuff for a very long time. How does that sound? Does that sound appealing to everybody? Is that what you're excited about? I know I am.
Let's go. Let's play. That's it. All the rules are settled.
All right, guys.
I can't imagine that this is going to benefit college football. If anything, it's just going to further divide that whole romantic college atmosphere that we like about Saturdays, and it's gonna feel like a Sunday just a day earlier. I don't know.
This may be right. Well, here's the thing, though. Like, there's no reason that players making money, that players sharing in the revenue should do anything to destroy our enjoyment of the game, right? It didn't bother me when the coaches were making a lot of money. It won't bother me when players are making some money too. So the making money isn't a problem.
Right.
The fact that you have lawlessness And in every sports I don't care what the sports organization is, you have to have some ground rules so that you have fair play. Everybody knows what the rules are. And it helps if you have rules that can bring some semblance of parity. That doesn't mean, like, college football's never had parity, but college football has had parity between the major powers. I don't know how long people are going to like it if the rules are such where one billionaire who is deeply involved in college sports can give his institution a dramatic leg up on everybody else in college football, or if you have a couple of people in that position. I suspect that's the sort of thing that will, in fact, ruin college football if it's allowed to continue. So you could easily imagine a set of rules that make sense. They're predictable. They allow the players to make their fair share of the revenues, and the players should. I mean, college football is making billions of dollars. It's crazy that the players wouldn't participate in that. But you have to bring some order to the Wild West. This settlement isn't going to do that. This settlement is just designed to avoid catastrophe from the NCAA's perspective. And I don't know that we're any closer to having an answer. The Big Ten and the SEC will probably get together. They'll probably set rules. And then everybody will wait and see whether the NLRB or state legislatures or federal regulators decide to screw up what they've agreed to. And nobody knows the answer to that, although I think the good money is on yes.
I still think the thing that romanticized college football a lot was that you got your class of freshmen. And then there was always constant turnover, right? You lost your seniors, they went to the NFL, and then there was this new group, but you got to know them as freshmen, as sophomores. You got to see them in a couple plays, and then you knew they were coming, and you knew that guy's going to be here next year. That guy's going to be here next year. This guy, he could have a big off season. He's a guy to watch. I know so much about this team because I know those young guys that, like, the casual fan doesn't know. And we've lost that. And again, good thing, bad thing, whatever it is, I think that's kind of one of the biggest changes for college football now. And I think, Chris, I mean, we've talked about, right, the idea of limiting options for people. I mean, college football players, whatever it is, if you are tuba major, if you're an econ major, if you're whatever, and another school has what you're looking for, you can go. And so I think that's one of those things where that is a frustrating part to a lot of longtime college football fans. You brought this guy in, he said, yeah, I love the school that you love. And now he bounces and goes because some other school says, sometimes it's a recruiting thing, a legitimate recruiting thing. Hey, you can start for us right now. We really need you. This is a fit. And sometimes they go, hey, we've got an extra $200,000 laying around. Do you want to come here just so we can sort of mess with that school and pull guys away from them? So that's a thing where, what rule do you put on that? Because if you're striking at the heart of just this guy has the freedom to pick up and go, then that's a tough thing to really lay it down. But it's also a really tough thing to continue feeling like college football is the college football you grew up with when that's going on a yearly basis for every team at any position for seemingly not a lot of great reasons.
Look at the standard we already hold recruits and players to, as far as, what is their star rating? Now, all of a sudden, you're putting a monetary value on them. All right, you're worth $200,000 a year to play at USC or wherever you're playing. Think about how all of a sudden now that constructive criticism turns into, that dude's not pulling his weight. He doesn't deserve that to make that much money. I mean, that's the direction we're going in.
Yeah, that's true. And look, here's the thing. There are a couple of things about college football that I've always loved that's made it, for me, better than the NFL. The players are better in the NFL. We know that, right? It's a higher level of play than college football. College football is more diverse. And so in some sense, I like that. Almost all NFL teams look the same. It's an exaggeration, but there are two things that I loved about college football. The tradition of college football is better than the tradition of the NFL. The rivalries are better because of that tradition.
Yep.
Some of that we've already lost, not all of it. and some of it we're getting back, right? Texas A&M and Texas are going to play again. That's great. But for a while they didn't because of money. Oklahoma and Nebraska went away. I don't know that I'm deeply going to miss not playing Cal or Stanford, but those are meaningful games that had a long history, and so part of it, we're losing tradition. The West Coast against the Big Ten in the Rose Bowl was a fantastic tradition for a very long time. That's gone. And the other thing that made college football great is that, unlike the NFL, where your favorite player may be playing for a divisional foe the next year, in college football, that wasn't the case. Marcus Allen and Junior Seau would always be USC Trojans, right? I would never watch those guys playing for Notre Dame or UCLA or Oregon or anybody else. That's obviously not the case anymore either. And look, it was always the case that transfers could happen. I mean, Troy Aikman went from Oklahoma to UCLA. Those things happened, but they were so rare. And now guys jumping back and forth, players that come to USC, play against UCLA, go to UCLA, play against USC, come back to USC to play against UCLA. Guys that spent their entire careers on the East Coast, knew nothing about USC, UCLA, knew nothing about USC, Notre Dame, didn't know anything about the history of USC football, and they come in and they're on campus for 4 months and they play, and then they disappear. That's not great. I mean, it may be good for the players. And I get why that's important. It's not great for fans. It's not great for college football. It takes away some of the stuff that made college football great. And so there needs to be a way that you can share money with players because they deserve it and they've earned it, without destroying all of the traditions in college football such that you're left with minor league NFL. Because that's what you'd be left with, right? You'd be left with the NFL, but it's not as good as the NFL, right? It's AAA. You'd be left with AAA. That AAA teams don't sell out 90,000 seat stadiums. They don't. And so you have to be able to preserve all that while still paying players. Nobody's been able to figure it out yet. And let's be honest about why. It's because the schools didn't want to. The schools didn't want to. They wanted to keep all the money. Everybody in the world understood, long before the O'Bannon brothers decided to challenge it in court, they knew it was grossly unfair that the players are doing what they can do to build what are, for all practical purposes, professional sports. They're on television. Everybody's making millions of dollars. The players don't share in the revenue. Everybody knew that was ridiculous. And when we say that the NCAA stood in the way of any sort of fair outcome, let's be honest. The NCAA does what the schools tell them to do. USC's administration stood in the way of that. UCLA's did, Notre Dame's did, Nebraska's did, Alabama's did. The schools wanted to keep all the money because they said they're professional sports, and then they sold really expensive tickets to 90,000 seat stadiums and put it on television, and they recruit millions of dollars, and they paid the coaches millions of dollars, and Kirk Herbstreit made millions of dollars, and they did nothing to help the players share in that, and they've led us to a crisis position because they chose not to. The schools screwed this whole thing up. And when you think about how terrible that is, this is one of the best things that colleges have going for them, and they screwed it up because they were greedy for decades. And now I don't know what's going to happen. Nobody knows what's going to happen. But what they want to happen will not happen, because Congress is not going to step in and say, yep, the NCAA can set the rules. You have an antitrust exemption. We're out. Do whatever you want. That will not happen. And it's not going to happen because nobody trusts them, and nobody should trust them. So there we are. The game that most of us love most in the world is at risk because the college administrators were stupid and greedy. That's what happened. And now nobody trusts the stupid, greedy college administrators to fix anything. So now the federal courts are involved, state legislatures are involved, federal regulators are involved, unions are involved, everybody's involved, it seems to me, including agents, including Phil Knight, which may be the worst of the list I just read. Do we have anything else to say about this? Show's getting really dark and depressing, but I feel pretty comfortable that we're speaking the truth. As Greg always says, we tell it like it is. I think we're telling it like it is today, but it's not happy.
No, these are just visceral reactions to the news coming out. Like you said, Chris, to lead this whole segment off. we don't know where this is going right now. It's just like somebody took a bunch of spaghetti, threw it against the wall, and we're just seeing what's sticking.
Yeah. All right. Eric, any final words on this, or should we move on to happier subjects?
I'm worried that any final words from us would start you going again. Not that I'm worried about that, but we're gonna run out of bandwidth, I think, to to carry the whole show.
Yeah, I'm trying really hard these days not to launch into long extended tirades. I mean, and that's hard for me, and I
That's
fail.
what people are here for, though.
Well, all right, let's move to topic number two. Let's our second installment of USC's great games against Big Ten opponents in the past. We hit three of them last week. We're gonna hit three new ones this week, just to whet our appetite for the wave of destruction that the USC football program is going to bring into the Big Ten conference this year. Okay, Mark, what do you got? What's your game?
You guys picked Rose Bowl games last week. I didn't. I'm going to pick the 1996 Rose Bowl. USC defeated Northwestern 41-32. The reason why I like that game, number one, Keyshawn Johnson, he was the star. He ended up becoming USC's previous number one. Actually, no, Carson Palmer. He was one of USC's number one overall draft picks. But just complete domination. And USC went in there as the most hated team in the country because Northwestern was considered the darling of the country, the underdog of all underdogs. I mean, a bunch of nerds who turned a magical football season into, oh my God, Northwestern's in the Rose Bowl. The only thing that would have been better in that Rose Bowl game, other than USC playing them, would have been Cal, because those two programs they're known for their academics compared to their sports programs. So for me, that was it was a game that it went back and forth, and in the end, USC finally pulled it out. I think, was it 41-32? Just a great game. And again, you had David versus Goliath, and this time Goliath put his foot on David and kind of squished him to the ground. I enjoyed it.
It was a great game. Darnell Autry was their star running back.
Great running back, absolutely.
Their current head coach was their All-American linebacker.
Yep.
Yeah, good game.
I know I'm in your wheelhouse, Chris. Those were your years.
Yeah, that was good. That was good stuff. Okay, McKinney, what's yours?
So I'm gonna go another Rose Bowl. The 2004 Rose Bowl after the 2003 season, USC Michigan. This was right. We had this whole run of, okay, USC's done it against X, but now there's this Big Ten, whatever. Right back when that was always the conversation about playing Big Ten teams for forever and ever and ever. This was I think we just won the national championship from Pete Carroll after that one. 9 sacks, I think, which was the most USC had that year. Shut out Michigan in the first half. And this was when they really hammered it home with the reverse pass from Mike Williams back to Matt Leinart. I can't remember the exact quote. I think Keith Jackson, something, when USC basically pulls that out, it's time to go home, and that ends it. That was just I mean, how many Rose Bowls could we go through at this point for USC? But that one, winning that first national championship, I know you had the BCS and whatever, but to do it in a way where you could still get enough AP voters to say, no, I don't care what happens in this other game, that was enough of a statement for me, and vote the way they did. That one was a fun afternoon.
Yeah, good times. I agree. Well, I'm going to go with the Rose Bowl of my own, also a Michigan Rose Bowl. This is 1990. Bo Schembechler's last game as the Wolverines head coach. If you don't remember, or if you aren't old enough to remember, I guess some of you might not be, although I suspect our audience skews old. So this was USC's third straight Rose Bowl under Larry Smith. They went after the 1987 season, lost a rematch game to Michigan State after one of the all-time great USC UCLA games put USC in the Rose Bowl. That was disappointing. 1988, USC number 1, number 2. They lose to Notre Dame. Then they go to the Rose Bowl and lose to Michigan, which really put it really put a sad face on what was otherwise a pretty impressive year. So this is their third Rose Bowl in a row. This time Michigan is considered the better team. USC already had, I think, 2 losses and a tie, and frankly underachieved most of the year because that was a loaded USC team. But they managed to tie Illinois. They lose to the Irish, of course, and so they go in with a good football team that hadn't played as well as they were supposed to. And it was an old school USC UCLA game. Ricky Irvins was USC star. I think he had 130, 140 yards rushing. He was a game MVP, and it was really a 3 yards cloud of dust kind of game all day. Trojans win 17-10. They send Bo Schembechler out a loser, which was not unusual for Bo. I think he was 2-8 or 2-9 in Rose Bowl games, so that was fitting that he would lose this one too. And they finally end the season with a Rose Bowl victory, and that was the apex, I suppose, for Larry Smith. Everything got ugly after that. So there we go. Our first 6 USC games against Big Ten opponents. We'll do another segment next week because there's so many. All right, let's close up our topics before we play our game. Let's close up our topics with this.
Well, Chris, I don't mean to jump in. You sent us one from a view. Look, I'm here for the viewers, right? I think we all are. You would send a viewer question, right? USC most likely to upset this year and most likely to get upset by.
You're exactly right. That's the and that is the low level of regard apparently that I hold for our viewers. That even when I select one of their questions, I accidentally throw it overboard. No, you're right. Viewer question: who is USC most likely to be upset by this year, and who are the Trojans most likely to upset? Eric, since you're the one that rescued us from my mistake, why don't you start us off?
So we're going upset. Not all the lines are out yet, but I think we can guess based on kind of the ones that have leaked out early or got set early. So most likely to upset, because I love to start with the best news possible.
Yep.
LSU was in the conversation for me just because that first game, I think you can look at what Dan Lynn did last year at UCLA. I still don't know if you have an exact picture of what he'll do with the USC defense. So out of the tunnel early, chance to maybe surprise, something like that. But I'm gonna go with Notre Dame at the end. That's a home game. I think 3.5. I think Notre Dame's got some pieces. I don't know what the quarterback situation is. I can go ahead and assume USC's offense is not going to sleepwalk through the first 3 quarters and throw those interceptions that they did. So that's the one for me. I don't see USC as I think it's 3.5 or something. So it's not huge, but it's also a home game. So if you're looking at 6.5 with the home field factored in to the 3.5 point favorite, that's one that I think USC can get and beat Notre Dame this year. The most likely to be upset by, I don't know if there's one that jumps out, but I will say if we're going to float trap games, the at Maryland game to me is one of those things where you've been able to write Maryland off for a long time. But if you really look at it, like that's an 8-win team. That's a team that's been competitive in the Big Ten. That's a big trip that USC, I know they go to Notre Dame and they've had road trips, but still a big trip that they're not used to taking. It's sandwiched between a couple home games there. And so that's the one to me that if you're looking at road trap games, I think that's one to circle.
Okay, good answers. Mark, what you got?
Yeah, I agree with Eric. I think that Maryland game, it kind of feels like it's, at least to me, it's got Boston College written all over it. It's got that Chestnut Hill feel to it. Just again, because it's a program that USC shouldn't even have to think about, beating, kind of like when they went to Boston College, but somehow or another they found a way to lose that game. And that would be their last trip to the East Coast for the season. So I could see them maybe overlooking that game because really their next true road game is up at Washington later in the year. Now, as far as who USC is going to upset, it's also going to be on the road. When the line came out, I'm still pissed off about it. There's no way in hell Michigan deserves to be a 2-touchdown favorite over USC. Not with how many players they lost off of that team, as well as their coaching staff. And I get it. They've got some nice pieces returning. They've got the culture that Jim Harbaugh left behind. But Michigan's not going to be a national championship quality team this year. They're just not. I mean, they don't even know who their quarterback is going to be this year. So that's going to be the game that USC goes in Ann Arbor after they've already beaten LSU. And they will upset Michigan. And everybody across the country, all those national pundits are going to write, USC's back.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually like both those picks. But my upset game is Notre Dame. I think that there's a world of difference between playing Notre Dame in South Bend and playing them in Los Angeles. There just is. And I think that I think USC is going to have, by that point in the season, I think the USC is going to have an offense that's going to be very difficult for Notre Dame to deal with. And so I like USC upsetting the Irish. I think you can make an argument for others. Eric mentioned LSU. I think that's a winnable game. Penn State at home is absolutely a winnable game, and Penn State may very well be a 6-point favorite. Well, we'll see. If USC beats LSU and beats Michigan, Penn State's not going to be a favorite at all. But right now, I think Penn State's a favorite. But I don't know. Penn State making a cross-country trip into the Coliseum with a coach that doesn't do very well in big games, I'm not at all convinced Penn State should be favored in that game. But I'm going to go with the Irish because that's the one I want the most, and I think USC probably wins that one. I agree on Maryland too. I tell you, it really depends what the start time is of these East Coast games. But I remember a decent Cal team going across country to play Maryland and starting at noon Eastern time or 9 a.m. Pacific time, and just sleptwalk through the first half, and it was an absolute disaster. And you see it a lot in the NFL when West Coast teams go east and they play an early game. It's difficult. So those are going to be tough, and USC is going to face that a lot playing in the Big Ten. But that could be a problem. I could imagine Nebraska being a problem, even though the game's going to be at the Coliseum. I do think Matt Rule's a really good coach. USC will have already played. They will already have played LSU. They will already have played Michigan. It wouldn't be a surprise if they're a little beat up. That's a game that could be concerning, even though Nebraska hasn't been very good for, I don't know, 30 years. Okay. There we go. And I apologize to the viewers for almost ignoring the viewer question we were going to answer. Okay. Let's go back now to what is really our last question before we play our game. Who should lead USC out of the tunnel? I'm going to give you 4 games. You can either give a particular person for 4 games, or you can just give 4 tunnel runners. I don't care. I'm a libertarian. You guys can do what you want. So, Penn State, Wisconsin, Nebraska, and Notre Dame. Who do we want running out of the tunnel, leading the team out of the tunnel for those 4 games? Mark Culkin, what do you got?
Yeah, I got 3 guys, and they can lock arms, leave the team out. You got to have Leon McQuay as one of them. You have that interception. You have to have Matt Bormeister. I mean, he did kick the winning field goal. And if Sam Darnold's available that weekend, why not?
All right. So that's your 3 for the Penn State game, huh? All right. I like it. McKinney, what do you got? Who do you want to see leading USC out of the tunnel this year?
So it's the guy who's most responsible for USC's win there. James Franklin should lead him out. Now, if he's already on the field or if he's talking to his team, which I might understand, I don't know if he does what typical coaches do pregame. So if he's otherwise busy, Mark Sanchez for me, that's going back to the previous Rose Bowl win over Penn State, 415 yards, 4 touchdowns. For Sanchez, he'd be my guy for that one.
Good call.
So there are a few that jump out at me. Look, Reggie's an obvious answer now that he is once again a Heisman winner, once again a member of good standing. We need to see Reggie. I would actually like to see Reggie and the entire 2004 team head out since it's the 20th anniversary of that group. So we could get as many of those guys as possible. I think I'd like to see that. But the one I most want to see this year, I want to see Pete Carroll lead USC out of the tunnel. And I'd like to see it especially for Notre Dame, since he terrorized Notre Dame for so long. I think that would be really fitting. So if we can get Pete Carroll running out of the tunnel against Notre Dame, that would make me a very happy camper. And I'll always take Ronnie and Marcus anytime they can do it. Okay, guys, you ready?
Well, we're not going to go through all those. You wanted one guy for all four. I think Mark and I had one guy for each game, or a couple guys for each game.
So
we don't phone stuff in, Chris. You ask us stuff and we deliver.
You do phone stuff in all the time.
We do all the time phone stuff in, but for this specific one, we did not.
Fine. Give me Wisconsin. Mark, go.
The last time Wisconsin visited the Coliseum was 1966. The score was 38-3. Whoever is still around from that USC team, lead them out.
Okay, that sounds like phoning it in. Okay, Mark, Eric, go ahead. Give me your Wisconsin. You didn't even give us a name. Give us a name.
So I go back to about then. Pete Beathard, the quarterback in the Rose Bowl win over Wisconsin. What is that? 63, I think, Rose Bowl. Always up there as one of the best, right, Rose Bowl games of all time. USC gets a big lead. Wisconsin comes back. They win. Pete Beathard wants to make it down that tunnel and come out. That's my pick for Wisconsin. The other option, sort of like a missing man formation when USC played Wisconsin with Clay Helton and no assistant coaches in the Holiday Bowl. And so that could be it too. The non-existent assistant coaches for that game could lead them out.
Could we bring out the coaches that were fired before that Wisconsin game? I don't know if Cal has a game that week, but maybe we can bring Justin Wilcox down and he can run out of the tunnel. I'm sure he'd get a warm reception. Okay, Nebraska game. Mark, what do you got?
I don't know. Cody Kessler. He had one of his best games of his Trojan career against the Cornhuskers. Let him have his Al Bundy moment that week.
Okay, Eric.
Quarterback also, John David Booty. So that was his first kind of statement that like the 2005 offense is not completely gone. Threw 3 touchdowns against Nebraska. Again, we're kind of connecting those things, but he's still very much involved. House of Victory, he's at all those events and still plugged into USC and around. So I'd love, he was the quarterback between guys and just wasn't Matt Leinart and didn't get as much of kind of fanfare as he did, but put up big numbers, big part, Rose Bowl winner. He's a guy I'd like to see come back out.
Yeah, 2-time Rose Bowl MVP, I think, and yet he's often overlooked, and it's hard not to be when you follow Carson and Matt. Okay, well, Notre Dame, Mark.
Yeah, this is the game where Reggie has his Heisman under his arm. This is the game. Okay. Initially, I was going to say Kessler. 2014 was actually a great year for Cody. USC didn't have a great year, but they did beat Notre Dame 49-14 that year. So since I already mentioned Cody, Reggie, last game of the year, got that Heisman under his arm. He could push the team over to the sideline.
Okay, I like it. Eric?
So this is where your anniversary year is right. It's 50 years since the 74 game. Any single person who was involved in that game and wants to make their way down the tunnel, line them all up, bring them all out.
I bring up the 66 team. I get pushed around. Eric brings up anybody who's still around. It's a fly. Are we good with that?
You brought up a random game against Wisconsin from a year people don't remember. I brought up maybe the greatest game in USC football history.
I would also point out, Mark, that you actually didn't give me time to criticize Eric. You jumped in. You're so defensive. You jumped in immediately before I could say anything. I'm not going to say anything now. If you're gonna do the dirty work for me, I'm not going to say anything. All right, we're done with that. It's time to play the game. Now, listen. Everybody knows that Culkin is on a 2-game winning streak, which, let's be honest, a 2-game winning streak in this game by Culkin over McKinney is almost equivalent to that 8-game streak against UCLA, right?
It's worse. I mean, be honest, it's worse.
It's worse. It's worse than the 13 years against Notre Dame. It is absolutely unacceptable, McKinney. So let's get your act together, all right? I mean, people are disappointed in you, and when they're disappointed in you, they're disappointed in the whole show. And frankly, Mark and I are tired of carrying you every week. All right, are you ready to do this?
It's possible.
All right, because Eric, because you're the underdog now, having lost twice in a row, I'm going to let you choose whether you answer first or second on the first question. What do you want?
I'm gonna go second. I love crushing Mark's answers as part of my answer, so I'm gonna go second.
Not the last 2 weeks, but okay. All right, listen. The first one is an easy question anyway. Mark Holkin, you have to go back to school and get a degree. What do you study?
All right, so I'm gonna major in communications and I'm gonna minor in AI technology.
AI technology. Okay, interesting. Eric, go ahead.
So one of the things I saw in the student athlete graduation, you can major in pop culture right now. This is not my answer, but that kind of popped out. So I'm gonna go boring. It's a business major, right? Business administration, running this clown show a little bit tighter and in a more direct way, I think would be the way to go.
So if that wasn't your answer, what was it exactly? You said this is
My
not
answer is
my
not
answer.
pop. Oh, pop culture was not my answer. I was just bringing that up as a talking point to start.
Okay, so it wasn't your answer. You just decided to hijack the show a little bit and talk about something that wasn't relevant to the game. You don't get a point.
That's not new, right? That's
It's not. It's
that's
not.
not new. We're not surprised by this.
And my response to it is not new. It's 1-0 Mark. Question number 2. What major college program other than USC would you like to see start playing better? McKinney.
So I'm going to take major college program and just mean like FBS, part of the big conferences. Northwestern for me. That's easy. Again, it's a little bit in your Michigan State wheelhouse, beating a bunch of Big Ten teams. Doesn't really fall back on recruiting rivalry with USC. So that would be a fun one.
Yeah, I figured that'd be your answer, and that's a legitimate answer, but Culkin's got something special probably. What do you got?
I do. First of all, Northwestern is not a major program despite being in the big conference.
Ouch. Okay,
so I think Nebraska is probably the right answer because they deserve it. They've got an entire state that will support them. It shuts down. When Nebraska plays football, everybody who lives in the state of Nebraska is rooting for the Nebraska Cornhuskers. They deserve it. They earned it. And to see them struggling the way they are, it's not good for college football.
I agree with Mark.
Mark's rooting. You guys are rooting for a USC loss this fall. That's interesting. That's an interesting way to go.
No, I want them to play very well and lose that game. And by the way, nobody at Northwestern cares whether Northwestern plays good football, which is why Mark gets a point. It's 2-0. And Mark's right. They're not major college. Number 3, scariest USC opponent with ball in his hands. This is all time. It doesn't have to be this year. All time. Mark, start us off.
Yeah, it's that dude that played for Notre Dame. I think they called him last name Rice.
Okay. Last name Rice. Eric McKinney.
I hate tackle him.
Eric McKinney, what do you got?
So I'm not going to pander, right? Your answer is Rocket Ismail, and I feel like I could have won this point very easily by going with him. I'm not going to do that because I'm gonna play uphill this whole time here. So I'm gonna go with a little bit off the board. Kenyon Barner from Oregon. That game that he had against USC, 38 carries, 321 yards, 5 touchdowns. I don't think he got touched more than once or twice. So in 2 years against USC, 53 carries for 444 yards and 7 touchdowns. Oh, by the way, the game where he didn't do anything, he still had a 77-yard kickoff in that one. Again, it's not a historic Rocket Ismail answer. That dude could have run for 1,000,000 yards if he played USC another year.
Okay. I'm going to give McKinney the point, and I'm going to tell you why. One is because he's already down 2-0, and we need him to do something. Second, his answer was courageous. He knew what answer would get him the win, and he chose something different. I don't know if that's a point in his favor or not. It may be why he's lost twice in a row. And third, he pulled out an answer that I didn't anticipate. By the way, there's no way that's the scariest USC opponent that USC's ever faced. It's not even close. Not even.
I can't say I'm not going to say Vince Young anymore on this show. I'm not going to talk about him.
Okay. All right, fine. I'm going to give you a point, even though I don't feel good about it. It's 2-1. Towel
That's
waving
what
on
I'm
the
here for,
sideline.
is to make you feel bad.
Yeah. Everybody likes that. That's why they watch the show. Towel waving on the sideline, yes or no, McKinney?
I mean, no, right? The energy I'm fine with. The stuff I'm fine with. The fact that towel waving is so synonymous with UCLA and USC fans absolutely hating it, you can't bring it here.
Culkin?
So I'm going to be brave. I'm going to say yes. And I'm going to say, especially when USC is winning big, because the towel waving becomes towel taunting. And when you can have, let's say USC's beating UCLA 40-0, and all of a sudden you see those towel wavings going across. UCLA has a tendency to lose their temper. They want to come fight. So that's why I'm going to say yes.
Okay. So you want to trigger UCLA and mock them. I'm in favor of that, but the problem is your answer is wrong, and it wasn't. I am opposed to choreography in general. If you have, in fact, I can tell you, if you don't even have to give me the name of the act. If it's a musical act, I just ask you before you tell me who it is. If you ask me whether I like them, I say, do they have choreography in their shows? And if the answer is yes, and I don't like them. That's certainly the case with football. I am opposed to choreography with football, and I find it embarrassing. Mark gets an answer, or Eric gets the point. Mark almost lost the point, but
I think
I'm trying to be
student
nice.
body left, student body right is beautiful choreography. But if you don't like it, Chris, that's hey.
Those are yeah. You just lost the point. You just lost the point. You just compared student body left and student body right to
It's a beautiful thing to watch when everybody.
It's 2-1. You better stop it right now. You have a 2-game winning streak. You had this game tied. Now you're down 1, and you keep talking. It's 2-1, McKinney. Here we go. Who's the better coach right now, Lane or Sark? Mark, go.
Lane.
Okay. You want to tell us why, or just
no? Because you told me to stop talking. So it's Lane.
That's fair. No, that's fair. You should stop talking. Eric, do you want to give an answer?
Yeah, I also think it's Lane. I think that Sark is still a little bit of a byproduct of what Texas has put together around him and coaching at Texas versus Ole Miss. But in terms of a guy that I would pick to like put together a game plan and win a game and run an offense, I think it's Lane. It's close though.
You're both right. You both get a point. It's 3-2. Sark is living off Texas oil money. Lane can actually coach, and I think he's grown up a little bit. Question number 6. Best lunchbox you had in elementary school. By the way, if there are any younger viewers on this show, and there may not be, in the old days, we used to have these lunch boxes. They were metal, and they would usually have, some cartoon character or something on the lunchbox. And buying your lunchbox before school starts that year is a big deal. I don't think that's been true for many years, but it used to be. Mark was alive when it was a big deal. Mark, best lunchbox you ever had, man?
Yeah, dude, it's Evel Knievel with the thermos. Yeah.
I forgot to even mention the thermos, but you're right. Thermos has to be a part of it. Evel Knievel's a good answer, Eric. Can you beat that?
I don't think so. I had a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles one, and that was the only one. And then I went brown paper bag for the rest of my schooling career. But
yeah, you should have. If that's the best.
This was one I knew that Mark was gonna have. I mean, you can't see the collection off to the side of his screen there, but he's got a couple dozen.
I suspect. Okay, 3-3. We got a good game going. Question number 7, McKinney. Give me a better movie line than I'm your Huckleberry.
Yeah, so I really tried to keep the theme of the sort of very calm, impending doom quote there. So I went with, what's the most you've ever lost on a coin toss?
Mark Holcomb?
Yeah, that one sucked, Eric. Go ahead. Make my day.
It's a trick question. There is no better movie line than I'm your Huckleberry. You both lose a point. It's 2-2. Question number 8. We're going to start with Mark Holcomb. Admit to the world the name of a chick flick that you actually enjoy watching.
I've actually watched this movie multiple times. That's how much I enjoyed it. Sweet Home Alabama.
Sweet Home Alabama. Okay, McKinney, I know you have a long list. Were you able to narrow it to just one?
I'm trying to figure out if I want to lose the game right now and answer Top Gun to this question.
Yeah.
I feel like that might be the way to go.
I think that's one of the best answers I've ever heard ever.
So I don't think it's better. And yeah. I mean, Love Actually is one that it's on all the time, right around that time of year, and totally fine. But I think that Top Gun can be considered there.
You know, Eric gets a point because he said that. It's ridiculous. The answer is ridiculous. But it was funny. We all laughed. He gets a point. It's 3-2. Here's a stupid question. Favorite cereal? Eric McKinney, go.
Favorite cereal? The go-to late night cereal, Cinnamon Toast Crunch.
Mark Holcomb?
Yeah, I live dangerously. Captain Crunch.
Captain Crunch. Dangerously because of the damage it does to the roof of your mouth, or?
It tears it up.
That's a good answer. It's 3-3 going into the final question.
The Top Gun of cereals.
The Top Gun of cereals. Okay. Who is the retired head coach, not a USC coach, that you'd want to have lunch with just to hear the stories? Mark Holcomb, go.
I'm going to pick Rex Ryan because I have a feeling that guy has got some really weird, funny, freaky stories that would just have me captivated for lunch.
Rex Ryan. Eric, I would be stunned if you can't beat Rex Ryan with this answer. Go ahead.
Jimmy Johnson for me. Miami stuff, Cowboys stuff, the rise of the kind of everything off the field, the taunting, all of that. There's a lot of characters when you go back even before he got to Miami, some of the guys he coached with there, that would be something that would cover a lot of ground.
Yeah, there are two coaches that I had thought of for this one. One of those was Barry Switzer, because Barry Switzer, just talking about recruiting with Barry Switzer and the shenanigans that would have been going on during that time frame, not to mention Bosworth and cocaine dealing out of the Oklahoma dorms. I mean, that would have been something. But Jimmy Johnson was my other one. Eric McKinney gets the point. He wins today's game 4-3. He's finally back in the win column. Colkin, don't do it. That was a legitimate win by him. It was legitimate.
I think the jury and the audience will disagree once this is posted.
Well, we're going to let them decide. Just the answer to the last question, or the game as a whole.
Oh, the game as a whole.
Oh no, I think people.
Earlier, the point you took away earlier, just to put Eric in the game, unnecessary.
Mark has his entire lunchbox aficionados club watch this thing. It's gonna be outrageous.
I took away a point and I gave Eric a point for a non-answer, but it was the funniest moment of the show, so I think that's legitimate. If people disagree, they disagree. Here's the thing: I don't care what the audience thinks. I couldn't possibly care less. I couldn't possibly care less. Okay, that's not entirely true. I like you people. Keep watching. Click the like button if you want. Okay, guys, are we done? Do you have any final word of wisdom you want to share with the people?
No, that sounds like it. We could circle back and do some more revenue sharing conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that would get us in a better mood if we went back to that, but we're not going to. Mark, that's a no for you. You don't want to say anything?
No for me. I'm just checking to see if there's any late breaking news that went on while we were talking. So,
and the answer is,
I can't see.
Okay, that's no late breaking news.
Eric, did we get a commitment or not? Did Scott,
no.
Scott's news break it?
All right. Well, we're still waiting on that transfer portal commitment, so maybe we'll talk about that next week, or maybe we won't. Maybe we'll spend an hour and a half talking about the NCAA settlement. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Click on like. Join us next week. Send in a viewer question if you want. We may or may not use it. And until then, fight on, everybody.